Welcome back to this episode of 37th and the World. Today, we are joined by Dr. Ryan Haas, the director of the John L. Thornton China Center and a senior fellow for foreign policy at the Center for Asia Policy Studies at the Brookings Institute. So, for our first question today, could you please provide a brief overview of your experience analyzing U.S.-China relations and your current role with the Brookings Institute?
I'd be happy to, Anwen, but first of all, I'm just Ryan, and you can call me Ryan. And really, it's wonderful to be on the show with you. Thank you for the invitation. I should just start out by saying I grew up in a small town in the Pacific Northwest, the northwest corner of the United States, and growing up, looking out at the Pacific Ocean, I just had an intuition, a sense that China would be central to our lives and the lives of my children's generation. And I wanted to figure out how to get a front row seat into understanding how China works and how the U.S.-China relationship works. And that led me into the Foreign Service of the State Department, which gave me an opportunity to serve in our embassy in Beijing and then come back and work at the White House on China issues for President Obama. And since then, I've moved to the back row. I work at a think tank now, and have a little bit more distance to have perspective in looking at and thinking about China and the U.S.-China relationship.
Amazing, thank you. So, taking a look at one of your recent articles, you note that despite the October 30th Trump and Xi meeting, there was no true breakthrough deal in that sense. Instead, you describe it as more of a shallow truce. Considering this, going forward, do you expect to see a return to back and forth retaliatory policies, more tense niceties, a mix of both, or what kind of situation?
Well, my guess is that we will probably not see a straight line for the U.S.-China relationship. There'll be ups and downs, zigs and zags, and that's okay. The reason why I have a high degree of confidence in that is, first of all, that's the pattern of the U.S.-China relationship more broadly, if you look over the course of decades, but also just more specifically, I did not see a lot of alignment coming out of the meeting between President Trump and President Xi in Busan in how both sides were characterizing what they agreed upon. There is no joint fact sheet. There is no joint document that both sides acknowledge as sort of base fact of what has happened. And the difference in interpretations, I expect will generate some bumps along the way going forward as they adjudicate, which understanding should prevail. But ultimately, I think that the space to follow will be the leaders, President Xi and President Trump, and where they want to take the relationship going forward. I think that's going to be the space that we'll need to watch.
Okay, interesting. And then looking at another facet of US-China relations. So in 2023, you contributed to a book on US-Taiwan relations, which emphasized the importance of American resolution to fortifying Taiwanese defense. However, going back to the recent Trump-Xi meeting, it was kind of suggested through press coverage that Xi might end up pushing for US opposition to Taiwanese independence. What actions do you see China potentially taking concerning Taiwan and or the Taiwan Strait? And will the Trump administration tangibly act to counter it?
Well, where we live in Washington, D.C., I think a lot of people are really fixated upon the risk of a military conflict in the Taiwan Strait. This notion that China could use force to try to seize Taiwan and assert control over it. I actually see China pursuing two paths to the same goal. One of them is the development of military capabilities and the option of use of force. But the other is a longer-term, more patient approach of coercion without violence, to use a term that Richard Bush and Bonnie Glaser and I and others have used, which is really trying over time to steadily wear down the psychological will of the people of Taiwan, to compel them to reach the conclusion that resistance is futile, that there is no path to peace and prosperity that does not run through Beijing, and that the sooner they accept this, the better life will be for everyone. And so those are two paths that we have to keep an eye on. We don't have the luxury of being able to just look at one and ignore the other. The challenge that I think that we're going to have in the coming years, though, is President Trump has told the world that he believes that President Xi has told him that there will not be any risk of use of force between now and the end of his term. Which suggests that, in his mind at least, he thinks that this issue is sort of resolved or dealt with, managed, which I'm not sure is the case. I don't have the same degree of confidence that he does. And so we're going to have to, even in spite of President Trump's confidence that this issue will be manageable, we're going to have to keep a close eye on both of these trajectories, both China's development of military capabilities as well as its effort to wear down the psychological will of the people of Taiwan, because this is a ongoing, unfolding story.
Amazing. So, looking at the kind of aspects that President Trump takes into account, the way that he sees US-China relations playing out, or the narrative that he has, do you believe he considers coming relations as a platform for primarily competition, cooperation, or is his focus still going to be partially avoidance of conflict?
It's a great question. I think as I think back on the past decade, in the United States at least, there's been this real focus, fixation on the notion of a great power competition between the United States and China. That has sort of been the animating structure of thinking around the relationship, or at least America's approach to the U.S.-China relationship. And since President Trump has returned to office, it's been pretty clear that he doesn't subscribe to that view. He does not seem invested in it. He has his own interpretation of what's going on, and I don't think that he's particularly inclined to look at the relationship solely and narrowly through the lens of competition. Now, does that mean that he is, hopeful for rainbows to, emerge and cooperation to come and bear fruit? I'm not sure about that either, but I just don't think that he's fully committed to the notion of great power competition. As I sort of try to observe his behavior, listen to what he's saying, and talk to people around him, my impression is that there are a few things that President Trump is trying to do. So, in his idealized version of the U.S.-China relationship, I think that he would like to reduce the risk of conflict as a first order priority. I think that he would like to ensure that more of the economic benefits from the U.S.-China relationship flow to the American people. I think that he would like to strengthen American sovereignty, including by reducing the flow of fentanyl and other substances from China into the United States. And then I think he would like to reduce America's dependence upon China for critical components upon which the American economy and the American people depend. Rare earths would be the most obvious example. That's the example that's been in the headlines for the past several months. But it's not the only example. But taken together, I think that those are sort of the animating pillars of the way that President Trump is approaching the U.S.-China relationship.
That makes sense. Thank you. So, taking a look at the kind of economic focus here, both for bolstering what the American people get and for increasing America's kind of competitive economic advantage over China. In your 2021 book, Adapting America's China Strategy in an Age of Competitive Interdependence, you advocate for bolstering America's competitive advantage against China specifically. How could the United States actively seek to achieve this in coming years? And can it be done through and under the current Trump administration?
Well, those are two very different questions. But first of all, thank you for noticing my previous books. I'm honored. Look, I think that President Trump's theory of the case is that by deregulating, by ensuring energy abundance, and by cutting taxes, the United States will be able to unleash economic growth. And that as the American economy goes stronger, that will be the foundation upon which America's national security is built. And so, if this theory works and a new golden age emerges for America's economy, it could put the United States in a stronger overall position to compete with China going forward. Um, we will have to see. There's a lot of ifs there, whether that works. My argument is a bit different. My argument is that we should look at where America's asymmetric strengths are in its competition with China. And there are three that really stand out to me. The first is America's alliance network, global alliance network, which is a unique asset and capability. The second is America's global convening power. America is uniquely able to bring countries together to solve challenges that no one country can deal with on its own. And then the third is America's ability to attract talent, to attract capital, to make the world's best and brightest people want to move to the United States to conduct research or launch businesses that change the world. And if the United States is capable of really advancing those three asymmetric advantages, which only it controls, it will be in a really strong position to compete with China regardless of what China does. Now, that is not the view that is prevailing among the president or his advisors. So I'll just note where the president's theory is and where mine is, and we'll see how things unfold.
For a brief follow-up to this question, if that's okay.
Of course.
Looking at China's report and recollection of the Trump Sea meeting, they make a point of noting how in the coming year, China will be hosting APEC or the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, while the United States will be hosting the G20 summit. So looking at those kind of events of having global, like the global organization and community convene in these countries, how is that an opportunity for the United States to display their strengths in this area?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would even add a third data point
Mm.
to what you're describing, which is that President Trump has indicated that he plans to travel to China in April of next year. And so if President Trump travels to China in April, if he or his top leadership travels to China for APEC, and if President Xi travels to Florida for the G20 next year, those are three opportunities for very senior level engagement. I think from China's perspective, that is a net plus because it sort of provides a left and right bound to how the relationship will unfold. It sort of keeps discipline upon the United States because no department or agency wants to be the one that stands in the way of, impedes, or obstructs the president's ability to make progress with President Xi, knowing that the two leaders will be meeting fairly soon. And so it keeps all the departments and agencies on a pretty short leash. I think that from China's perspective, that's good, right? Because it will increase the odds of a certain degree of stability in the relationship and reduce the risk of orthogonal actions that could knock the relationship off course and therefore undermine President Trump's ability to get done things that he wants to get done with President Xi. Um, how that will actually play out in reality, I mean, we'll see. President Trump also indicated that he wanted to travel to China earlier this year. That did not happen. So I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that he will actually travel to China in April, even though he has announced that he plans to do so. But I think that is his intention. And I think that it will keep the president engaged and focused on China amid the many things that he has to deal with and contend with. And, you know, from Beijing's perspective, the more that President Trump is focused on and paying attention to the management of the U.S.-China relationship, the lower the odds and risk are that actions will be taken that could knock things off course.
All right, that makes sense. I'll look forward to reading your reports on those respective summits next year, I'm
Okay.
sure. And then going
Thank you.
forward, of course, what are a couple key points of U.S.-China foreign policy that, in your opinion, 37th and the world listeners should be focused on in general?
Well, as I take a step back and really try to reflect upon where the relationship is and where it may be going, the meta theme that I think that we need to be paying attention to is the fact that both the United States and China, each for their own reasons and each in their own ways, are trying to insulate themselves from being dependent upon the other. In other words, they're trying to loosen the sort of the thick interdependence that pulls both countries together because the past year has exposed the fact that both are vulnerable to the other if either chooses to weaponize choke points that the other relies upon. And so to me, this raises a couple of questions. I mean, the first is which country will do better at reducing its dependence upon the other? And so in the American case, the most obvious example, but not the only one, is rare earths. There are analogous examples in the case of China, whether it's jet engines or high-end semiconductor chips or other things. So which one will do a better job of insulating against its dependence upon the other? And then the second question, which I think we ought to spend some time thinking about, is if both countries do have success in reducing their dependence upon each other, what effect will that have on the overall relationship? You could make a case that as the two countries sort of move away from each other, there will be less connectivity between both countries, and that could lead to instances or risk of greater friction or heightened tensions. You could also make the opposite case that if both countries feel less vulnerable to the other, they gain greater self-confidence in their capacity to manage the relationship. This could provide a basis for a more mature, less volatile relationship where both countries have a greater degree of confidence in their capacity to manage the relationship. I don't know. I don't think anyone knows what the answer is to that question, but that's a question that we ought to keep in mind as we're, evaluating events and their impacts.
That makes sense. Thank you very much. And then just to wrap this up, bringing back the focus to you and your specific work, are you currently working on any projects, publications, or books that listeners should be on the lookout for? And is there a specific aspect of US-China relations that is going to be your next focus?
It's a great question. It's a wonderful question. I'm honored to be asked it. The one thing that I would sort of flag and think about that's been very much on my mind recently is a dialogue that I have an opportunity to be a part of on the role of artificial intelligence in national security. And it's a U.S.-China Track 2 dialogue, which means that it's former officials and experts from both sides who participate in it, not officials. But the purpose of the dialogue is to explore whether it is possible for the United States and China to mutually identify boundaries around the uses of artificial intelligence in national security. The most visible output of this dialogue, which has been ongoing since the first Trump administration, since 2018, was the development of a body of work around the idea that humans must maintain control over all decisions on the launches of nuclear weapons, that they must remain in the control of human hands. And, it was gratifying to see President Biden and President Xi affirm this when they met in their final meeting of President Biden's term. But the question now is, how do we extend that logic further? Is it possible for the United States and China, at least at a Track 2 level, to agree that there should not be delegation to agentic AI to launch attacks that could have strategic effects, that could put the United States and China on a collision course towards potentially conflict? Can we agree that that should never be delegated to decisions based upon agentic AI? And then another question that sort of comes from this is, what happens when non-state actors weaponize artificial intelligence to do harm to humanity? Is it possible for the United States and China to be on the same side of that problem in trying to limit its risks or prepare to respond to it? And so these are, some of the questions that we're grappling with through this dialogue, which I'm a part of, and it's some of the most meaningful work that I have the privilege of being able to work on in my current role at Brookings.
That is incredibly interesting. Thank you so much for your time here today. I thoroughly enjoyed this opportunity to meet and speak with you.
Thank you, Anwen. The feeling is mutual, and I look forward to staying in touch.
This was 37th in the World, the official podcast of the Georgetown Journal of International Affairs. Please be sure to subscribe and leave a comment and rating on whichever streaming platform you use. To support the podcast, you can click the link in this podcast's description that says support the show. To read other insightful interviews and articles, please check out gajia.georgetown.edu.